Internal motivation, it's about aligning a behavior with things that you value or that are part of your identity or that are one of your personal goals. People do not tend to like to be told what to do. I think of our nudges as a Trojan horse that bring much more powerful behavioral science inside of it.
Amy Bucher is a behavioral scientist and author of Engaged, a practical guide for designing products that motivate action. With a background in psychology and deep experience applying behavioral science to healthcare, Amy now serves as Chief Behavioral Officer at Lirio, where she leads the development of personalized, AI-powered nudges that support better health choices. Join me as we explore Amy's approach to ethical behavior design and find out why she thinks personalization is the key to turning good intentions into lasting change. Welcome, everyone. I'm here with the amazing Amy Bucher. What nationality is that name from?
It's German, and that's actually the German name for books. I changed my name when I got married, which I was on the fence about, but the fact that it means books, I was like, okay, I got to go for that.
That's awesome. So welcome to our podcast. I'm thrilled to have you here.
I'm thrilled to be here. I've been really excited about this.
Yeah, we spoke years ago. I'm so excited to get an update. You have been requested by our community as a guest, really eager to hear what you have to say. And I know the folks here have questions as well. Let's start with your definition of behavioral design, because that term gets thrown around all over the place. How do you define it in practical terms?
I say it's basically the application of behavioral science frameworks and approaches to design. But then, of course, it's, well, what is behavioral science? And I call that the set of disciplines that really look at the influences on people's behavior. So I'm a psychologist, that's what my training is in. But the team that I have hired at Lirio who work for me represent public health. I actually have a few people with kinesiology degrees because in the exercise sciences, you're looking at fitness and how do you get people to do those activities. Health geography, there's sociology, anthropology, behavioral economics, of course. So all of those disciplines that kind of share at their heart understanding why people behave the way that they do.
One of the issues that confuses a lot of people is the relationship between behavioral science and nudges and intrinsic motivation. A lot of what we focus on is really grounding what you do in intrinsic motivation and then using nudges and mechanics and other progression techniques to move people toward what they want to do anyway. Not every app can do that, and not everybody approaches it. How do you think about internal motivation and integrate that with your work?
I think this is why personalization has been a red thread through my career because internal motivation, it's about aligning a behavior with things that you value or that are part of your identity or that are one of your personal goals. So I'm not talking about a goal like I'm going to get 10,000 steps today, but maybe a deeper seated goal to be healthy or live a long life for your kids. If we can help people in the moment draw a connection between the specific things we're asking them to do and those bigger, more meaningful personal things, then that's where intrinsic motivation comes from. And of course, the gold standard of intrinsic motivation is it's just enjoyable. It feels good. You being in the video game space, I'm sure you know all about flow and those experiences that people can have while gaming. I don't find that those are as common in the health behavior world where I live. Sometimes people who get really into exercise may experience that, like the runner's high. But a lot of times, if it's something like taking your medication, we really have to think more about those values, that identity, and those life goals. And where personalization comes in is I can't impose those things on you. I can't tell you what you value. I can maybe guess, and the more I know you, the better that guess might be. But it's really about getting you to share that or getting you to give me enough clues that I can help connect with that. So I sometimes think of my job really as a translator. How do I take this usually clinically decided health behavior? If it's something like a cancer screening, there is a recommending body that has said it's a good idea for people with these characteristics to get this screening on this timetable. How do I take that dry clinical behavioral recommendation and understand something about you and then find that middle ground where it's like, you're not getting this screening just to check a box on some kind of healthy person checklist. You're getting it because it actually supports your vision of yourself as someone who cares for yourself and your family, or because this is going to enable you to live longer than your relatives did who had a particular disease and you want to do better in the next generation. So I've always been very attracted to digital technologies that allow us to understand something about the individual that maybe isn't self-evident from a database, and then use that to talk to them a little bit differently.
You made a post recently that touched on this issue, and I think it's such a great example of the power of personalization when you combine it with nudges. You made a post about vaccines and autonomy. Can
Yes.
you recap that and share like the aha insight?
Yeah. So in my job at Lirio, our product is called precision nudging. And so we send nudges, messages to people around their behaviors, including vaccines. And one of the things that happens when we send a message via text message is that if people reply, we actually can see that it comes into a database. So we monitor those. We want to understand what people are experiencing and get their thoughts, their reactions in their own words. And it gives us a lot of insight for improving the product, improving the messaging as well. But a theme that consistently comes out, both among the people who choose to vaccinate and those who don't, is that they value having the ability to make that choice for themselves. People do not tend to like to be told what to do. There are circumstances. We use a technique called credible source a lot, which is if somebody like your family physician recommends something, you're more likely to do it because you believe that this person is a good authority and you've sort of decided that it's okay to listen to them. But even in that scenario, you've made a choice that you are going to let this credible source influence your behavior. So we've published now two papers on what we've learned from these text message replies, one from COVID-19 outreach in 2021 and one from RSV vaccine outreach in 23, which, by the way, that was a brand new vaccine. It got approved in June by the FDA for adults in the United States. And we began nudging in August that year. So we were especially interested in those text messages because this group had never been offered this vaccine before. We did not know what their reactions would be. That autonomy theme was so loud and clear. I mean, just whether people were upset because they felt like they weren't being given enough autonomy or pleased because they liked the way that the nudge was presented and they felt like it really was their choice. One of the things that we just did this last summer is we ran some this last summer, it's June. It's so hot out, it feels like we're in the late part of summer. We just did this in the last few months though. Some patient research where we were looking specifically at autonomy supportive messaging and what is the best way to really enforce this idea that you're empowered to do what feels right for you. And when we nudge around vaccines this fall, that's going to be a big part of the way that we anchor that messaging. And I think that's going to be especially important. I mean, the ACIP, the body that makes decisions about which vaccines are recommended, is meeting this week. And there's a lot of turbulence and uncertainty. We don't know what they will recommend or what will be available to people. I do expect it will look different from prior seasons. But I think given this atmosphere, it's more important than ever to help people feel like they're choices in their hands, that they have the support and resources to, if they do feel like they need to learn more. And a lot of the replies, they are questions. People really are trying to learn more. So it's about supporting that process for them and not telling them what they have to do.
So it sounds like a really good example of personalized nudges.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're going to talk about the field of behavior science, which you are an expert in translating into product land, and some of the pitfalls and how you can navigate that. Let's start with nudges. So nudges are small reminders or pushes in some way that are intended to get somebody to take a certain behavior, right? In a nutshell.
Correct. Yes.
So for a while, nudges were the solution to everything. Oh my gosh. And then there was a rash of, we tried nudges and it didn't work in this situation and it didn't work in that situation. So just like every technique, it's not magical solution to every problem. You've now had so much experience with this. What have you learned about situations where nudges are pretty likely to work, maybe with certain design approaches, and then situations where nudges in general can't really get in there and solve the problem? How can you help us sort of sort through all of this noise about whether or not nudges actually work?
Yeah, I love this question. And I'll tell you all, when I first joined Lirio, I reacted to the name precision nudging for exactly that reason, because I was trained in social and organizational psychology, which is really about systems thinking and how does context affect behavior. And nudges are a little antithetical to that because they don't necessarily, I shouldn't say antithetical, but they're not just such a small part of the picture. And I've come around because I think the term nudging is meaningful in the marketplace. People are familiar with it and they have some sense when they hear that term that it's going to be something behavioral. It's probably going to come in a subtle little package. And I think of our nudges as a Trojan horse that bring much more powerful behavioral science inside of it. So, in my mind, if we send you a text message about the vaccine, the fact of the text message is the nudge. That's the sort of alert on your phone that lets you know that something's changed in your environment for you to react to. But what that text message says is conveying deeper behavioral science that's hopefully addressing some of those bigger reasons why you maybe haven't gotten that vaccine yet, whether it's giving you education or it's reassuring you about something, or it's letting you know that credible source is recommending this for you. One of the things that I think is really important for any kind of nudge to work is to consider the system in which it's being put. And when we launch our products at Lirio, we go through this process we call behavioral discovery and design, where we actually sit down with the client, we audit whatever action path we're nudging people towards. So if it's scheduling a cancer screening or walking into a pharmacy for the vaccine, we really want to understand what we are asking people to do. Some of that's because you have to communicate that request clearly in a nudge if you expect people to follow through. We all know, I mean, this is just a good UX type design principle. You have to be very precise and clear about what you ask people to do because we're a very creative species. We'll figure out some way to do something different otherwise. But what we find oftentimes is that there's something in that action path that it's full of friction. It's hard for people to complete. We have one example working with a health system client around scheduling mammograms, and they had a chatbot. They were actually asking people to click a link in the nudge and go to this chatbot and schedule their mammogram appointment. And we could see from the digital data that a lot of people were clicking that link, but not very many of them were coming out the other side of the chatbot with an appointment scheduled. So we did an analysis and we found that the chatbot flow was kind of confusing. And the biggest pitfall was midway through the flow, it would ask people for their insurance information. Most people who started that chatbot flow didn't have their insurance card in hand. There was nothing up front that prepared them that this might be necessary. And in fact, it wasn't actually necessary to book the appointment if you were an established patient, but there was nothing indicating that you could skip the question either. So we made some changes to that appointment flow, and we were able to really quickly see a lot more people who were coming out the other side with that appointment scheduled and then ultimately getting their mammogram. So that's an example where the nudge by itself might bring someone to a front door, but without considering the bigger system you're asking them to act in, you're not ultimately going to get the outcomes that you're looking for. So we try to always take that wide lens and make sure that we're setting the nudge up for as much success as possible. The behaviors where it works really well are the low friction behaviors. So things like opening an email that doesn't cost people a lot to click open on an email. And so a nudge, and we do this in terms of like our subject lines in an email, where we're really good at getting people to have their curiosity piqued and to see relevance right away. But then once they're inside that email, if we're asking them to schedule a mammogram, that's a bigger thing. They have to think about taking time away from work, potentially getting childcare, transportation, so forth and so on. And so that's where a nudge really isn't enough, and we need to accompany it with other approaches.
That's really amazing. How has AI changed how you're doing this work? I
Yeah.
imagine in profound ways, but maybe you can. A lot of what we talk about in our community is swap notes on what we're doing with the AI, what we tried. This didn't live up to its promises. This was amazing, but then we had to edit it. What are you learning and trying
I'm gonna
that's accelerating your work?
Well, two separate things. So one is Lirio itself uses AI. So,
Right.
which is part of why I wanted to join the company. I was really interested in AI and hadn't had the chance to work hands-on. So we use a type of AI called reinforcement learning. And what it basically does is select what goes into our nudges and other aspects of those nudges as well. Is it an email or a text message or an app notification? When does it come? Do we send it or not? We can actually look at what is the likelihood that this is an effective nudge. And if that likelihood falls below a threshold, the AI can basically say, this won't achieve the objective, don't send. So that's changed my work a lot, just in the sense that I have to think differently about building the product. I have to think differently about how the meta information around our content. We do a lot of tagging to make our content machine learning readable, and so that our reinforcement learning systems can kind of know what's what. So there's that whole piece of it. But then on the personal side, I've been using AI tools myself more and more to try to accelerate my work. We're going through an organizational initiative to improve our efficiency with AI. So we're piloting different tools for different teams. And we do have to be careful about what we use because we work with PHI. So we have to be very careful that we're not exposing any any data or that type of thing to a tool that might be training on it. But like for an example, my team has been using Canva to build some of our visual assets. And this is very recent, but it's really accelerated our ability to prep for client workshops. So we just did a really cool storyboarding workshop with a new client in the interest of figuring out their patient action paths, like I just described. So this is a sort of a concierge health package that people can purchase a subscription to. And we were able to use Canva to create these very cool storyboards that we then brought to the client site and had them react to and mark up and put post-its over. And it was really visually interesting. And I think it just showed a greater degree of preparation and knowledge than we would have been able to do with not using AI, especially because my team, most of us are behavioral scientists. We're not people who are good at creating visual assets. So that was fantastic. Just the other day, one of the things I used it for is I took some of those text message replies that I was mentioning with the vaccines. If somebody responds with an emoji, it gets transformed to these like nonsense characters, which as a human being, I can't do anything with. And I just had this thought. I'm like, I wonder if ChatGPT can help me with this. So I extracted just those items from the Excel spreadsheet where they were, threw them into ChatGPT, and I was like, can you make sense of these nonsense characters at the start of each of these messages? And it was like, yes, this one's a thumbs up, this one's a heart. So I actually had it put together for me a table of which messages elicited which emoji reactions. And now we are getting this sentiment that we couldn't get before. So that took me, I don't know, 20 minutes with AI. I had to go back and forth with ChatGPT to have it reformat and fix some mistakes as I was figuring out what it was doing. But it would have taken me a long time to do it manually. So that was a really cool use and one that I look forward to trying again.
I think we're really eager to hear more about Lirio, especially after this buildup.
So we are going global. The storyboard exercise I mentioned was actually for our first international client in Costa Rica. So part of the reason that we wanted to invest the time in having something that was so in depth was because in addition to learning the client, we're learning some of the cultural nuances as well that how healthcare is received. We are also really evolving our AI, which has been exciting. So we had a white paper come out last year about what we call the large behavioral model. But the idea here is that as we interact with an individual over more types of behaviors, we can start to triangulate on who they are as a person. So I always use the example, like if you're afraid of needles, that will affect your vaccine behavior, but it won't necessarily affect your mammogram behavior. So we can't treat people in, I don't know, a terrified healthcare consumer segment. That's not accurate for them across different situations. And so what we're working with our technology is essentially to map out the individual so that as they go from the pharmacy to the doctor's office to the grocery store, we can interact with them in the right way to really personalize for their needs in that situation.
Thank you so much. You were just dropping gems, Amy. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. This is such a great community, and I really appreciate everything that you put out there too.